Hey everyone, it's Kenji. We're going to be cooking some tenderloin. So, a tenderloin roast, I think it's great for the holidays. I got here a small roast that I cooked the traditional way. So I seared this in a skillet and then I finished it off in a hot oven. That's the normal way that you would cook a tenderloin. As I was cooking it, I placed a Combustion ink predictive thermometer inside, which told me exactly when it got to 120 degrees in the center, which is a nice rare for tenderloin. Looks beautiful on the outside. And when I pull this open, we're going to see that it is perfectly medium rare in the center, really nice and juicy pink, but as we get towards those sort of outer edges, it becomes increasingly more and more well done. In fact, using the data from the temperature probe, I know that by the time the center was at 120 degrees, the outer layers were up to 185 degrees. So that is very, very overcooked. What I want to show you today is a better way to cook a tenderloin roast. It's the reverse sear. And so essentially what we're going to do is reverse the cooking process. So rather than starting it in a hot pan and finishing it in the oven, we're going to start it in a relatively low temperature oven and finish it in a hot pan. What that's going to do for us is get us a roast that is much more evenly cooked from edge to center. It's also going to preclude the need to rest the meat, and it's going to give us a better sear on the surface. So here's how we do that. So to show you the difference between what happens when you cook a tenderloin the traditional way versus the reverse sear, we're going to use these Combustion ink predictive thermometers from my friend Chris Young. It will show us exactly what's going on inside the meat. And so this thermometer has sensors all up and down its length, 7 different sensors. So we'll be able to see what the meat looks like at the very center, all the way to the end of the meat. And we can compare the traditional method versus the reverse sear. Anyway, what we're going to do first is prep this meat for cooking. So this is a whole beef tenderloin that we got, just took it out of its packaging. So a whole beef tenderloin like this is going to have one sort of thicker side and one sort of thinner tapered side. Depending on how you get it, you might have to do a little bit of trimming. We'll just cut off a little bit of this sort of extra layer of fat. And if there's silver skin, so like little things like this, you might want to take those out too. So in order to get this meat to cook evenly, we want it to be a sort of even shape. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to take this thinner end and just fold it over on itself like that, and then put it folded side down. So at this point, it's roughly even width and thickness all the way around. In order to get it to stay in that shape, we're going to tie it. You can tie beef a number of ways. The easiest method is to just cut off a length of butcher's twine like that, and just use, a typical granny knot, so just tie it like that. And what I like to do is then twist the knot around like that. That way it doesn't slip, and then you can tie it just like you would do your shoelace, right? And that'll work. A more effective knot for tying meat, if you want to learn it, is a butcher's knot. So this is a roll of butcher's twine. I keep it in a drawer, take the end out. That way you can just pull out whatever length you need. So a butcher's knot works this way. You take the loose end, you pull it under your meat, and we're going to tie this at about maybe 1.5 inch intervals. And then we pull this side over. Now at this point, we're going to lay these both on our hand with the loose end on our left, put our thumb over both pieces of string like that. Then we're going to take the loose end, wrap it around our thumb to the outside, bring it underneath everything. Okay, and so now it's going underneath both the loose end and the fixed end. We're going to bring it all the way back around and then stick it back through that loop in the same direction that our thumb is pointing. Okay. And at that point, you can just pull that to tighten it up. And so at this point, it becomes a sort of self-cinching knot. So you lift it up and you pull it down. And if you do that a few times, you end up with a nice tight knot around the meat. And then you can just trim off the ends and repeat. Tenderloin, it is one of these cuts that is extremely lean. It's valued because it's tender. It's very, very lean. So, it's not going to have as much flavor as something like a standing rib roast or a New York strip loin roast. But, it's prized for its tenderness. And as long as you don't overcook it, it's going to end up plenty juicy. And so one of the keys to not overcooking it is that you do want to make sure you monitor its temperature properly. And you want to make sure that it is a nice even shape. And that's where the twine here comes in. The other thing about tenderloin is because it's so tender, it is a little bit delicate. So if we cinch these up too tight, you can do what I did here, which is actually it'll sort of dig into the meat. You generally don't want to be doing that because then later on we're going to have to dig out bits of string from inside the roast as we're carving it, which is not the nicest way to do it. So I'm going to try and be a little bit more gentle than I was there. Get this tied all along its length. Okay, so that is going to help our roast stay sort of nice and evenly shaped as it cooks. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to dry brine it. So we're going to essentially season it with salt and pepper and then leave it uncovered in the fridge overnight. And that's going to allow the surface to dry so that it sears better, but is also going to allow some of the salt to work its way into the meat, which will help it retain a bit of moisture as it cooks. So we're going to salt every side. I'm also going to put a little sprinkle of MSG on there. And finally, I'll hit it with some black pepper. All right, so all we're gonna do now is get it on a tray, on a rack, so that there's air circulation underneath it, and then we're going to bring it out the next day, and we will be ready to reverse sear it. But first, we're gonna pop this guy in the fridge. All right, so I'll see ya the next day. All right, so you can see that the tenderloin is nice and dry on the outside, which is really important because that's going to help us give it a nice sear later on, develop those really nice browned flavors. All right, so now all I'm going to do, I'm going to take my predictive thermometer. I'm going to stick it through kind of at an angle like this so that I make sure that it at least goes through the center. I don't have to get the tip right there because it has those sensors all along it, but as long as it gets through the center, it will be able to tell me what's going on in there. So using this thermometer, I'm going to be able to tell exactly what's going on from the center all the way to the edge of that tenderloin. And we'll track that data, and I will show you what's going on later. Oh, let me turn this off. All right, so I'm going to pop this into a 250-degree oven so that it can really slowly and gently get up to temperature. And when that happens, I'll come back and we'll go on to the next step. All right, so I'll see you in. All right, it's been about an hour and a half. My thermometer is showing that there is about 11 minutes left. The very center is currently at 115. I'm going to bring it up to 120. The outer edges right now, the very edge is at 133, and just past the surface is about 120 and 119, which is good. That means there's not a huge temperature differential. So in those last 10 minutes before the tenderloin comes out of the oven and I give it a sear, I'm going to make a really simple sauce. This is one of my favorite sauces to do with tenderloin. You know, tenderloin is very lean, and so I like doing a sort of nice creamy sauce with it. So we're just going to make a real simple horseradish cream. So I've got some chives right here that I'm going to slice, and then I've got some prepared horseradish, as well as some creme fraiche in that bowl right there. This sauce is honestly one of the simplest but most delicious things I think you can do with a lean meat like tenderloin. You could, of course, you know, if you wanted to like go all out, you can make a bordelaise or a demi-glace, something where you have to, you know, make a really rich veal or beef stock and reduce it down. But, you know, because tenderloin is so lean and doesn't really provide a lot of sort of drippings as it cooks, I find that this is the sauce I generally turn to because it doesn't require me to make any other thing, or it doesn't require many pan drippings. All right, so I'm going to take my creme fraiche. I'm going to add my minced chives to it. I'm going to add my prepared horseradish. If you don't have prepared, you know, if you want to, you could use fresh horseradish, just grate it on a microplane and add some vinegar. When you add vinegar to it, it makes it hotter. And let's see, lots of black pepper, relatively coarsely ground here. And then some salt. And a little pinch of MSG, about 8-to-1 salt to MSG. You can leave the MSG out if you don't like using MSG for whatever reason, but it will make it taste better. Okay, and we're just going to mix that all up. And let's give it a little taste. Just a little more salt. Just more black pepper. It should be sort of acidic, a little bit hot, a little bit of that sort of oniony aroma from the chives, plenty of black pepper to go with the beef. That's great. All right, and to finish off my roast, I've also got some thyme and some shallots that I'm just going to kind of roughly slice up. And that's what we're going to use to sear our beef at the end. So I will see you in 10 more minutes, 11 more minutes. So we're down to 2 seconds. 2, 1. All right, our beef is ready. So I'm going to pull it out. It's at a core temperature of 125. And as you can see, it is really sort of nice and dry on the outside. You know, and that's going to help us sear it. And you also notice that there aren't really that many drippings compared to sort of a normal roast that you do. That's partly because of the dry brining we did, and also because we did this really nice low, slow cook. Oh, it feels really nicely medium rare in there. All right, so to finish it, you could let this rest. You could finish it under the broiler if you want. You could finish on the grill. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do it in a skillet, and you might notice that it's too big to fit in my big skillet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it in half, and that might seem like a mistake, but I'll show you what we're going to do at the very end. So we'll slice it in half. First of all, let's take a look at that interior. Oh, look at that beautiful, beautiful rosy red, medium rare from edge to center. A little bit of gray on the around the very edge, but we don't have any of that sort of bullseye where it's very rare in the center and much more well done on the edges. All right, so I'm going to melt some butter. We got a really hot pan here. All right, we're going to get that butter melted. Let it brown just a little bit. I'll get a big spoon out so that we can baste. And then once that butter is sort of really nicely browned and piping hot, we're going to get our beef in there. Okay. So the goal here is that we're going to sort of sear it as fast as we can. And when I sear meats in a skillet like this, I like to move them around so that you're always sort of picking up the heat from all around the pan, because what happens is the part of the pan where the meat first went down is going to cool pretty rapidly. And so by moving it around, you're kind of maximizing and sort of evening out the energy that it is getting. And it should really only need to sear for a few moments on each side in order to get a nice brown crust. The bottom side is going to be the least crusty part, you know. So what we call the presentation side is going to be this top part, the driest part, which is going to get the nicest crust. But I am going to let it sit on that bottom side just a little bit longer than I'll let it sit on the other sides in order to really kind of maximize that crust over there. Oh, we're looking pretty good already. All right, so we're going to flip it over now. I'm going to get my sliced shallots and thyme in there. We'll get those in there, get the butter flavored a little bit. So once that butter's sort of flavored with the thyme and the shallots, you can kind of get your spoon and start, you know, piling that stuff on top of there and letting that hot butter run over. But honestly, with a roast this big, you know, basting is really just a sort of surface flavoring element, and it's not going to really affect how much it cooks. It's also not really going to affect how much flavor it picks up, because in this case, you know, the butter is going to end up coating the entire thing anyway. Let's see what that second side looks like. Oh, look at that beautiful crust there. All right, let's get our sides going. Get some of that butter over there. All right, and then let's get that last side. Beautiful. You can see that the tying we did at the beginning really helps that meat stay nice and evenly shaped, and it also helps it cook more evenly so that everyone gets a really nice piece at the end, you know? All right, I think we're looking pretty good. Let's pull that meat out here. We'll put it right back onto the tray that we roasted it in. Presentation side up. And then what we'll do is we'll take that shallot and thyme flavored butter. We'll just kind of pour it right over the top to give it one sort of final coating of flavor here. So we can let this rest if we want, but with a reverse sear, as you can see from the use of the thermometer, you have pretty evenly cooked meat all throughout. So we don't really have to let this rest, which means I get to carve it straight away. So let me show you how we deal with that once we get to actually presenting the roast. All right, we're going to transfer it over to our cutting board here. I'm going to just snip through the bits of twine, the tip of our knife here, and then we will unravel those. What I like to do is kind of grab every end first and kind of peel them back like that. Once you have them all done like that, you grab all the twine and you just kind of get them all at once like that. All right, so we'll grab the ends of the twine. And now we're gonna start cutting these into sort of serving sized slices. Oh my God, look at how evenly that's cooked. That is simply perfect. Holiday table worthy. When we actually serve it, what I'm gonna do is kind of fan them out on my board. And so when you get to this end piece, all you have to do is take that one piece and flip it over. Now nobody sees that that one side was exposed to the heat of the pan. All right, let's get a couple pieces onto a plate. We'll take some of that horseradish cream. Put a little dollop of it onto the plate there. Take a couple slices of this tenderloin and lay them out there. Let's finish it off with a little bit of coarse sea salt, a little bit of black pepper. I got these sort of picked thyme leaves here. You could use thyme leaves, you could use chives, you could use nothing. And then I'm gonna also finish it off with just a touch of olive oil. And wow. You know what, I'll even pull out my con steak knives. All right, should we take a taste of this? Oh man. Tenderloin, perfectly cooked. So juicy, so tender. I love that horseradish cream on here. You know, prime ribeye is my favorite steak, but tenderloin, when it's cooked right, seasoned right, not overdone, can be so, so good. All right, reverse sear tenderloin, that's how we do it. I season it, tie it up, let it rest in the fridge overnight in order for the surface to dry out a little bit and to give the salt a chance to penetrate. And then the next day I slow roast it in a really low oven. I was using the Combustion ink thermometer to tell exactly when it gets up to 120. And then I take it out and sear it in butter with a couple of aromatics, and then it's ready to serve. Happy holidays, guys, gals, non-binary pals. See you later.